Hey, friends, welcome to another exciting session with the Undisrupted Summit. My name is Ian Khan, and today I've got a very special person with you. This is Jay Heinrichs, best-selling author. He literally is the person to tell us about communication and how to be the person who says the right thing, to be able to go out there and say the things that you need to say, to be the leader that you want to be, to achieve the things you want to achieve. Jay, I'll let you do the talking. Welcome to the summit.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate it. So that's quite an intro.
Hey,
So
listen,
I have
it's
to live up
extraordinary.
to it. I have to be really convincing now.
There's so much more I can talk about. Listen, you've easily spent a few decades doing what you do. You come from a very strong background in writing, communication, journalism. You've seen so much. I mean, you and I could be considered dinosaurs to some extent because we were doing things when there was no internet, right? There was still the manual world going on. What are your experiences? And of course, your best-selling book out there. Help us understand your journey of being who you are right now, career-wise, and how did that start? I really want to inspire people to know that you can start somewhere and you can be somewhere, and what journeys look like.
Yeah, well, what a great question. I'll tell you honestly, I wasn't a great student because when I was a kid, I hung out at the library a lot, reading books. Remember when people did that? Um, I would just pull books down at random in the library and read them in no particular order. But much as I love books, I had this sense that words do more than just sit around looking pretty or telling stories. Words have power, and that's really important for what I'm hoping we're going to do today. I didn't get that in school or college or even graduate school, to really learn about what the true power of words
Yep.
would
Yep.
be. So I became a magazine journalist thinking that would help me learn this stuff, and an editor. I eventually ended up at Dartmouth College as an administrator, and I got bored. One day, I was wandering through the stacks of the library, my old habit, when I found myself in this section of the library where like half the fluorescent bulbs had been burned out, there were
Yep.
cobwebs all over the place. And I thought, this is interesting. Like I
Yeah.
discovered something ancient, some secret. And there was a pair of books in red leather stood out from the others. And I opened up one of them and found it was signed by John Quincy Adams. And if you're a history buff, that's kind of a big deal to find a future president's signature. Turns out he was teaching rhetoric and oratory, which is about the power of words, at Harvard when he was still a U.S. senator. And he was talking to these kids, first-year students at Harvard, who were future masters of the universe. I mean, this is 1810. America was about to explode in terms of economics and power and everything else. And he told these students, this is so important to me, I can still recite it, to catch from the relics of ancient oratory, it's this 3,000-year-old discipline, unresisted powers, which mold the mind of man, or the will of the speaker, and yield the guidance of the nation to the dominion of the voice. And I thought, I got to get me some of these powers. So I spent the next 20 years bothering rhetoricians around the world and reading what John Quincy Adams told me to read in these other lectures. And that led to my wife telling me to quit my job. She's really smart. I do everything she says. And to write, thank you for arguing.
The way, thank you. That's so important, and I love that story. The way we read, the way we learn, the way we acquire knowledge. Now, primary reason to read something is to bring into your brain words that somebody has written, right? Like literally. And these words could be entertainment, it could be fiction, it could be gaining a skill. Like it's all these things. It's news, entertainment, what have you. Today, we've changed the way this knowledge goes into our head, because now I can watch a video, I can go to YouTube, learn that skill, and so on. But still, books are such a fundamental, it's not just reading a book, but it's what's your process of the acquisition of knowledge behind the curtain scenes happening. And I read a lot, I write, I read, and I'm that library person. And the strategy that I use to read books, I do not read books cover to cover. I cannot read every word and then take time. I read very fast, and I want to get the main core parts, and I may go back and read more. And I may have 4 books that I'm reading at the same time that are giving me something to do through the day. What's your reading personality? How do you read? And then we'll get into writing.
Well, I find myself reading books, if you want to call it that, through audiobooks more and more. I do it when I'm working out. I do it when I'm doing chores, when I'm driving, or whatever. So it's a great way to absorb a whole lot of information. And, if I don't like it, if I don't like the voice of the book, I'm like you. I'll stop. I may get back to it and then go back.
Yeah.
But I also read nonfiction and fiction on paper as well. And I think that there's something to concentrating over a period of time that's really useful somehow to the brain.
Yeah.
And, I'm old enough to really be worried about my brain. So trying to keep it as exercise as much as possible is important. I tell young students that if they actually end up reading books, they're going to be a member of an elite that has very few people in it in their generation, and that'll get them ahead. I think the future greatest leaders will be the people who can concentrate over the longest time and the most deeply, and books will help you do that.
Yeah. You know what? I got young kids and they're gaming and whatnot. I love gaming. Game all you can, but don't ignore the fact that there's got to be some structured learning, some gap between the words that you read and understanding them and distilling them down. It's a whole psychology of understanding something that is about book reading. Whether it's a Kobo, it's a regular book or whatnot.
Well, I'll tell you, if I can interrupt you, Andrew, this is really important. If you want to make games when you're older, I'll tell you what, don't go into coding because AI is going to be doing that for you.
Yeah, AI is changing many things.
Right. Well, and world building, on the other hand, yes, maybe some LLMs, large language models, will be able to do that. But I think the real genius games in the future will be built by world builders who can think deeply, and their brains had better be prepared for it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. AI is just completely changing every industry. And I feel we're like at a very initial stage of the evolution of AI, although news hype is, feels like, we've reached the end of it. We still haven't gotten started when you look at the overall picture. That's my belief. Jay, you have a best-selling book. You wrote a book that did really well. You have others coming up. You've got 4 or 5 books happening. What is the process of this communicating your ideas, putting them down on paper, calling it a book, and then putting it out in the world? Like, how do we get started?
Well, if you want to write a book, it's the industry has changed like everything else. So in order to sell a book over a traditional kind of publisher, you need to get an agent and all that stuff. And then, the agent has to hawk the book over a proposal that you have to write. It's a long, agonizing process. But once you do get the book published by a publisher, you're still responsible for marketing it. So increasingly, there are lots of ways to self-publish. And I'll tell you what, Amazon has a great Kindle publishing system that allows you to publish paper books as well as online. So it's something, I think, if you're really interested in doing that, something you can look into. First of all, though, you need to know something. And I think a lot of people write books skipping that process. Know something specific. In my case, it's rhetoric, this 3,000-year-old art of persuasion. Yeah. But then beyond that, you also need an audience. And you'd have to gather it online through social media, Substack, or some other way to do that. Once you do that, you know something, you have an audience. The writing the book part, obviously, that takes a lot of practice and work. But that's actually relatively the easy part, except for the other 2.
Yeah. And as part of your work in promoting, pushing your books out to the world, did you end up doing things that you never did? Like, for example, the Substack you mentioned or what have you? What were some of the things you did that really helped you?
Years and years ago, I did what was called a blog. And I was, in fact, discouraged from doing it by the publisher because they just didn't know how that might work. And I ended up getting 50,000 subscribers within about 2 years. Took a long time. But here's the thing. I was very specific about people who would be passionate about what I was writing. So I picked out word nerds. I specifically wrote a blog that told you the Greek names for figures of speech. I won't go there for this audience. But knowing that these total nerds would end up loving anything I did because they were so nerdy, there were so few people who did it. They were the ones who spread the word about the book and made it a bestseller.
Incredible. You have a new book coming up, and this is Aristotle's Guide to Self-Persuasion, How Ancient Rhetoric, Taylor Swift, and Your Own Soul Can Help You Change Your Life. Tell us about this book.
Well, this is the cool thing. I'm a and I hate to admit this, but I'm a big fan of Aristotle. And so I was reading his rhetoric, his Nicomachean Ethics, his logic, all this stuff that leads to persuasion. I had never read his book On the Soul, which is the most whacked out book, this man, and the most entertaining. And so it turns out that what Aristotle believed is, and this doesn't conflict necessarily if you're a Christian or of some other religion, you can still have a soul that lives beyond you. Aristotle believed that actually the soul is your deepest, most innermost, most noble self. And if you can live up to that, then you can accomplish just about anything. The question is, how are you going to convince your soul that you're worth it? And so I thought, what if I applied the tools of rhetoric to myself? And I spent this year-long experiment to see if I could apply the same tools of manipulation that you see in advertising, marketing, politics, to manipulate myself, even though I know the tools and I'm manipulating myself. And the tools work better than I thought. That led to the book.
Can you share one tool? Can you share one tool our audiences can kind of check or do or engage with?
I'll tell you the tool I hear about the most from Thank You for Arguing. And it also can apply to manipulating yourself. A lot of the times when we get stuck in a confrontation or a question or a decision, we're in the wrong tense. We're in the past tense or the present tense. When Aristotle himself said, and this has been proven in research and in everything I've ever done in business, if you can switch to the future tense, you win. And so in thinking about that, like, I suck at this, or I'm not a person who sweats, or, you know, I can't do this, I can't do that. That's all in the present tense. Or I did this in the past. This was terrible. I made a huge mistake. If you switch to the future saying, what are we going to do about this? Just a quick story, if I may.
Yeah, please. We'd love to.
I bothered my family, 2 kids, now grown, with talk about rhetoric around the dinner table for years and years. One day I'm standing in the bathroom wearing nothing but a towel, first thing in the morning, and I found that the toothpaste tube had been squeezed dry. And so I, being the father of a teenage son, I knew who the culprit was. So I yelled through this closed door, "George, my son, who used up all the toothpaste?" And I hear this sarcastic voice on the other end saying, "That's not the point, is it, Dad? The point is, how are we going to keep this from happening again?"
Wow.
In there, he switched to future. He was being sarcastic. He was making fun of me. And he also knew if he could make me laugh, he could get away with murder. But he reframed the issue. And framing is so important in any kind of persuasion, including self-persuasion. And frame number 1 is frame to the future. Pivot to the future tense.
I love it. It is so profound. I absolutely understand what that means and how you can change it. And you can apply this to everything when you have self-negative talk about your career, your job, your work, meaning of life, making more money, relationships. You can literally apply this to everything else and just reframe yourself and say, instead of saying, let's pick money. I never have money for anything, to reframe it for me.
Well, I can tell you what, I would reframe definition there. It's another kind of reframing. I'd say, what do you mean by wealth? Like, what is wealth exactly? And, you know, back to Aristotle, he said wealth has to do with what you think wealth is. So wealth can be independence. Wealth can be power. Wealth can be an ability to live the way you want. And so wealth, on the other hand, may have nothing to do with money. So if you can reframe it that way, you know, you can make it work for yourself. And so, but hugely important to think about the definition. We throw around terms all the time. I mean, if you look at when people talk about jobs, we're so worried about AI, find an economist who can even tell you what a job is exactly. And they'll run into the weeds with it. So redefining things and redefining yourself is a great way to do it. Am I wealthy? Yes. How am I wealthy? Let's figure out how.
I love it. Hey, Jay, thank you so much for your time. Where can we find your work, buy your book, learn more about you?
You can Google me, Jay Heinrichs. That's obviously the easiest way. I also have a Substack newsletter that goes out in email twice a week. Just Jay Heinrichs on Substack is the best way. Or go to jayheinrichs.com if you want to get nerdy.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you jumping on, inspiring our viewers to do better and to crush, whatever is coming their way. Really appreciate it, and we'll send this out to our people, and they're gonna love it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you.